The small roadside restaurant was almost empty when the evening shift was coming to an end. Outside, the streetlights had just turned on, casting long yellow reflections across the quiet road. Inside, the soft sound of dishes clinking and a low radio playing in the kitchen filled the air. She moved between the tables with calm, practiced steps, wiping the last few empty ones and stacking menus neatly. It had been a long day, just like most days. Her feet hurt, and her shoulders felt heavy from hours of carrying trays, but she kept a gentle expression on her face. People who worked with her often said she had a rare kind of patience. No matter how rude a customer might be or how stressful the evening became, she stayed polite and kind. The restaurant owner trusted her more than anyone else on staff. She rarely complained, rarely asked for time off, and always offered to help when someone else could not finish their shift. But behind that calm attitude was a life that was not always easy. Her paycheck barely covered rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger sibling. Every month was a careful balance between bills, groceries, and saving a little for emergencies. Still, she never spoke much about her struggles. She believed everyone carried their own problems, and kindness cost nothing. That evening had been especially tiring. A large group had come in just before closing, leaving behind a mountain of dishes and crumbs scattered across the floor. She had spent nearly an hour cleaning everything while the kitchen staff slowly packed up for the night. Finally, it looked like the shift was ending. She poured herself a small glass of water and leaned against the counter for a moment. The cool drink felt refreshing after hours of moving around. Across the room, the cook was turning off the grill, while another worker counted the cash register. The quiet moment felt peaceful. Then suddenly, the silence outside broke. The sharp sound of an ambulance siren grew louder as it rushed down the road. The bright flashing lights reflected through the restaurant windows, painting the walls red and blue. Everyone inside looked up. The ambulance slowed and stopped near the entrance of the restaurant. For a moment, no one understood what was happening. The door burst open, and two paramedics rushed inside. Their uniforms were marked with small stains, and their expressions showed clear urgency. One of them quickly looked around the room. "Does anyone here have blood type O negative?" he asked loudly. The staff exchanged confused looks. The waitress stepped closer, listening carefully. The paramedic continued speaking quickly. "There's been a serious car accident nearby. The patient has lost a lot of blood. We are taking him to the hospital, but the blood bank won't be ready in time. We need someone with O negative right now." The room grew silent. Blood donation was not something people expected to hear about in the middle of a restaurant shift. One of the workers shook his head nervously. Another quietly said he did not know his blood type. The paramedic glanced at his watch with worry. Every second mattered. The waitress stood still for a moment, thinking. Her mind went back to a medical test she had taken years earlier during a community health event. She clearly remembered the nurse explaining that her blood type was O negative, one of the rare types that could help many people in emergencies. Her heart began beating faster. She looked at the tired faces of her co-workers, then back at the paramedics. Without making a big scene, she quietly stepped forward. "I think that's my blood type," she said softly. Both paramedics turned toward her immediately. "You're sure?" one of them asked. She nodded. "Yes, I was tested before." The paramedic took a quick step closer. "We would need you to come to the hospital with us right now. The patient doesn't have much time." She glanced around the restaurant. Her shift was technically over, but she knew the others still had cleaning to finish. She also had to wake up early for another long day tomorrow. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she imagined someone lying in an ambulance, fighting to survive. That thought was enough. "I'll come," she said. The restaurant owner stepped forward, surprised but supportive. "Go," he told her. "We'll finish up here." She quickly grabbed her jacket and followed the paramedics outside. The cool night air rushed past as they guided her toward the ambulance. Inside, the scene was tense. A man lay on a stretcher, surrounded by medical equipment. His face was pale, and there were bandages around his shoulder and chest. Machines beeped softly while a medic adjusted a bag of fluids. The waitress tried not to stare too much. She had never been this close to an emergency before. One of the paramedics helped her sit down. "You're doing a very good thing," he said gently. The ambulance doors closed with a loud thud, and the vehicle sped off toward the hospital. The ride felt fast and quiet at the same time. She watched the city lights pass by through the small window while the medics continued working. Even though she did not know the injured man, she silently hoped he would survive. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Doctors and nurses were already waiting when the ambulance arrived. The patient was rushed through the emergency doors while a nurse guided the waitress to another room. They confirmed her blood type with a quick test. Minutes later, the donation process began. She sat in a comfortable chair while a nurse carefully prepared the equipment. "Thank you for doing this," the nurse said with a warm smile. She simply nodded. To her, it did not feel like something heroic. Someone needed help, and she happened to be able to give it. That was all. The room was quiet except for the gentle hum of medical machines. As the blood donation continued, she wondered briefly about the injured man, who he was, where he had been going before the accident. But those thoughts quickly faded. What mattered most was that the doctors now had what they needed. After some time, the nurse removed the needle and placed a small bandage on her arm. "All done," she said kindly. "You help a lot tonight." The waitress felt slightly tired, but otherwise fine. She drank a small juice the nurse gave her and rested for a few minutes. Somewhere down the hallway, doctors were still working on the injured patient. She never asked for details. Eventually, she stood up and thanked the hospital staff before leaving quietly. Outside, the night air felt cooler than before. The streets were calmer now, with only a few cars passing by. A hospital security guard helped her call a taxi so she could return home. During the ride, she leaned her head against the window, feeling exhausted but peaceful. To her, the night had simply taken an unexpected turn. By morning, life would return to normal. She would wake up early, put on her uniform, and return to the same restaurant. Customers would come and go. Orders would be taken. Plates would be served. And the moment she spent at the hospital would slowly become just another memory. What she did not know was that the man she helped save was not an ordinary patient. He was a powerful billionaire businessman whose name appeared in newspapers and business magazines around the world. At that very moment, doctors were telling his family that a stranger's blood donation had saved his life. And somewhere in the quiet city, the waitress who made that possible was already on her way home, unaware that the simple decision she made tonight would soon change both of their lives forever. Days passed slowly after the ambulance left a roadside restaurant that night. The city outside continued its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet miracle that had happened. The waitress returned to her normal routine, carrying trays, taking orders, and cleaning tables. She didn't tell anyone about the blood donation. To her, it was simply something she had done to help a person in need, nothing more. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the man who had been in the car accident was recovering. His injuries had been serious, and the doctors often reminded him of how lucky he had been. Every time he opened his eyes and looked around, he realized that without immediate help, he might not have survived. The doctors explained that the blood he had received was critical. Without it, he would not have made it through the night. He listened carefully to the hospital staff as they described the events. A stranger, someone he had never met before, had rushed to the hospital and donated blood for him. The thought stirred something deep inside him. Gratitude mixed with curiosity, and he found himself thinking about this unknown person constantly. Who was she? How did she find herself at the hospital at the exact right time? How had she done this without hesitation? He asked the nurses and doctors, but hospital privacy rules made it difficult to get information. They could only tell him that the donor was a young woman, a waitress from a nearby restaurant, who had acted quickly and selflessly. No names were given, and no personal details could be shared. All he knew was that she had saved his life. As he lay in the hospital bed, recovering slowly, he thought about the world he had built around himself. A world of luxury, business deals, and public recognition. Yet, despite all that, he realized that he had never truly experienced the kind of pure, uncalculated kindness that this woman had shown. Her action was not motivated by fame, money, or influence. It was genuine, simple, and real, and it struck him harder than anything else ever had. During his recovery, He began reflecting on his life. The accident had given him time to think. Time he never allowed himself before. Meetings, contracts, deadlines, and boardrooms had consumed most of his days, leaving very little room for anything authentic. The gratitude he felt toward this stranger grew into a deep sense of wanting to find her. He wanted to see her face, hear her voice, and thank her properly. His assistants, who had been managing his business while he was hospitalized, noticed a change in him. He was no longer asking about market trends or company profits every morning. Instead, he repeatedly asked about the waitress who had saved him. They were puzzled, but knew better than to question him. They began quietly investigating. Phone calls to the hospital, inquiries at nearby businesses, and even speaking with local taxi drivers who might have taken her to the hospital. They followed every possible lead to find the woman who had unknowingly become a very important person in his life. Back at the restaurant, the waitress continued her work, unaware of the storm her simple act had created. She greeted customers with a smile, balanced plates in her hands, and carried herself with the same calm demeanor as always. She had no idea that the man she helped was someone wealthy, someone whose life was completely different from her own. To her, he was just a patient who needed help, and she had been glad to provide it. That was enough. One evening, as she wiped down a counter after a particularly busy day, she thought briefly about the donation. It had been a long shift, and the ride home had given her time to reflect on what had happened. She felt satisfied knowing she had done the right thing, but she never imagined anyone would remember or care about her actions. She assumed life would continue exactly as it always had. In the hospital, the billionaire recovered steadily. His body was healing, but his mind remained occupied with the stranger who had given her blood so selflessly. He could not shake the memory of her calm determination, the way she had stepped forward without hesitation. It was a small gesture, but to him, it meant the world. He began imagining meeting her again, talking to her, and understanding the person behind that act of courage. His friends and family noticed the change as well. He began speaking differently, more gently, more thoughtfully. He was quieter, more reflective, and increasingly concerned with acts of kindness rather than material gain. His recovery had changed not just his health, but also his outlook on life. It was clear that the memory of the waitress had made a significant impact on him, inspiring thoughts he had never considered before. As his assistants continued their search, they started contacting restaurants in the area. They asked questions discreetly, trying not to reveal the billionaire's identity too soon. Several restaurants were checked, and finally, they found a match. They confirmed the name of the young woman who had donated blood that night. She was a waitress at a small roadside restaurant, a person completely ordinary by all appearances, yet extraordinary in the action she had taken. The billionaire was informed immediately. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had spent most of his life making big decisions and taking calculated risks, but this was different. This was personal. Finding the woman who had saved his life was not a business matter. It was a matter of gratitude, respect, and curiosity. He wanted to meet her, not as a businessman or a public figure, but simply as someone whose life had been touched by her kindness. Meanwhile, life at the restaurant continued as usual. The waitress finished her evening shift, cleaned the last tables, and packed away the remaining utensils. She was tired but content. Her actions had been unnoticed, as she expected, and she carried on with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done the right thing without seeking recognition. She thought about going home to her small apartment, to a simple dinner, and to her sibling who waited for her. That was her life, and she accepted it fully, never imagining that soon it would intersect with someone entirely different, someone whose world was vast and complicated, yet whose life she had now become a part of in a meaningful way. The contrast between their worlds could not have been greater. She, living a life of ordinary struggles, facing each day with courage and humility. He, surrounded by wealth, fame, and power, suddenly realizing that the most important things in life were not material possessions, but human connections, empathy, and small acts of kindness. Their paths had crossed in a moment of crisis, and that single moment had created a link neither of them could ignore. The days continued to pass, and both went about their routines. The waitress remained unaware that someone important was searching for her. The billionaire, though physically recovering, could not stop. Thinking about her, he replayed the night of the accident in his mind, remembering every detail, every movement, every gesture. Her quiet determination, her willingness to act without hesitation, and her humble attitude had left a lasting impression. It was a reminder to him that not all heroes wore suits or commanded attention. Some were ordinary people, invisible to the world, whose actions carried immense weight in moments of need. That realization stayed with him, shaping the way he thought, spoke, and behaved in the weeks that followed. The story of that night, though unknown to most, had already begun to change two lives. For her, it remained a quiet memory, a small act she would remember without expecting any reward. For him, it was a turning point, a lesson in gratitude and humility that he would carry forever. And though neither of them could see it yet, the moment had set in motion a chain of events that would eventually bring them together again, changing both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Weeks passed after the accident, and life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy for the waitress. The restaurant continued to hum with its usual activity. Customers came and went, some leaving generous tips, some barely leaving any at all. The waitress moved between tables with her familiar grace, wiping spills, carrying trays, and exchanging polite words with patrons. She felt a quiet satisfaction at finishing each day, knowing she had done her best. She had almost forgotten about the night she donated blood. The memory remained in her mind like a small flicker, a quiet act that she had performed without expectation of reward or recognition. To her, that moment had already passed, and life required her full attention. Bills to pay, errands to run, and her sibling to care for. Meanwhile, across the city, the billionaire was healing well. His body had recovered enough to leave the hospital, but his thoughts were occupied by the young woman who had saved him. His assistants had finally located her workplace, and he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Meeting her in person was not like making a business deal. He could not control how he felt or what he would say. All he knew was that he had to see her again. He chose a quiet afternoon to visit the restaurant. He wanted the moment to feel natural, not like a spectacle. The small black car rolled up to the curb, unnoticed by most passers-by. He stepped out, his steps calm and measured, carrying with him the air of authority he always wore, but tempered by a subtle nervousness that only he could feel. To him, this was not about power or influence. It was about meeting someone who had changed his life without even knowing it. Inside the restaurant, the waitress was finishing up a table. She noticed a man walking in, confident yet unobtrusive. He had a quiet presence that immediately drew attention without forcing it. The other staff paused for a brief moment, noticing his demeanor, but she barely looked up. Customers often came and went, some important, some not. She was used to noticing people without thinking too much about them. When he approached the counter, she finally looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, she did not recognize him. He appeared calm and composed, like any other customer who had come in to eat. He smiled politely, a small gesture, and said in a soft voice, "Excuse me, could I speak to the waitress on duty today?" She nodded and stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's me," she said. He paused, studying her face carefully, as though trying to make sure she was the same person he had in mind. "Do you remember donating blood at the hospital a few weeks ago?" he asked quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. She frowned in concentration for a moment, then realization dawned on her. "Yes," she said softly. "You're the patient from that night." He nodded. "I am, and I wanted to thank you again. You saved my life." She felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. It was not common for someone to express gratitude so sincerely. "It was nothing," she replied. "I just did what anyone else would have done." "No," he said gently, shaking his head. "Not anyone would have. You came forward without hesitation. You didn't ask anything in return. That courage and kindness, it is rare. I will never forget it." The restaurant grew quiet around them. Some co-workers stopped what they were doing, unsure if they should interfere. Regular customers paused in curiosity, sensing that something significant was unfolding. But the waitress did not feel nervous. She had done what she could that night, and never expected attention or reward. She felt calm, grounded by the simplicity of her actions. They began to talk, carefully and naturally. The billionaire asked how her day had gone, how she had found work at the restaurant, and how life treated her in general. She answered honestly, without exaggeration or pretension, as she always did. Her words were simple, sincere, and heartfelt. There was a quiet strength in her honesty that he found both comforting and inspiring. As their conversation continued, she began to notice small details about him. He seemed different from the people she had imagined in the newspapers or business magazines. There was no arrogance, no show of wealth or power. Instead, there was a calm humility, a recognition that life was fragile, and that he owed a part of his recovery to her kindness. That realization made her feel slightly self-conscious, though she quickly brushed it off. She had acted without expectation, and that had always been her nature. He listened intently as she spoke, asking thoughtful questions, and responding with genuine interest. It was a simple interaction, yet there was a depth to it that both of them felt. Time seemed to slow in the small restaurant, as though the world outside had paused to allow this meeting to unfold. The conversation was not about money, fame, or status. It was about humanity, connection, and the quiet beauty of selfless acts. After a while, he thanked her once more. "I know you don't expect anything," he said, "but I want you to know that what you did that night mattered more than words can express. You saved my life. You reminded me of something important. That kindness still exists, even in the smallest actions." She nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and quiet pride. "I'm glad you're okay," she said simply. "That's all I needed." For a moment, they both sat in silence, appreciating the shared understanding that passed between them. No one else in the room spoke. The ordinary noise of dishes, conversations, and footsteps faded into the background. It was a rare and unspoken connection, one forged in a moment of crisis and strengthened by the simplicity of truth and gratitude. Before leaving, he said, "I hope we can see each other again. I'd like to know more about you." She smiled faintly, unsure of what to say, but sensing that this was the beginning of something new, something unexpected. "Perhaps," she replied, leaving the possibility open, though cautious. She had lived a life of practical decisions, never imagining that someone from such a different world would enter her own so quietly and sincerely. He nodded, understanding the hesitation, and left the restaurant with a polite farewell. The small black car waited quietly outside as he stepped into it, leaving the waitress standing behind the counter. She felt a strange mixture of excitement, confusion, and curiosity. The man she had helped weeks ago had returned, not with show of wealth, but with genuine gratitude and human connection. That alone was powerful. The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Customers continued to eat, staff continued their work, and the waitress carried on with her shift. Yet, in the quiet corners of her mind, she thought about the man who had returned to thank her. She wondered who he was beyond the hospital room, what kind of life he led, and how the world looked through his eyes. She did not yet understand how deeply their lives had already become intertwined by a single moment of kindness. Across the city, he reflected on the meeting as well. The encounter had reinforced something he had begun to realize during his recovery, that life was not only about success, wealth, or influence. It was about human connection, about acts of courage and compassion, that change lives in ways money could never measure. Meeting her again, hearing her voice, and seeing her face reminded him of that truth in the most vivid way. In the days that followed, he thought about her constantly. He remembered the way she had moved calmly through the hospital room, how she had spoken without hesitation, and how she had given without expecting anything. Each memory deepened his admiration and curiosity. He wanted to know more about her life, her struggles, and the quiet strength she carried every day. She continued her life at the restaurant, unaware of the impact she had already made. To her, it was a simple act, a single night, a donation of blood. Yet for him, it was a turning point, a moment that would influence his decisions, his thoughts, and eventually the way he approached life and relationships. Their worlds had collided briefly, but the echo of that collision was only beginning to be felt, carrying with it the potential to change both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The quiet night air settled over the city, and in their separate lives, both the waitress and the billionaire carried the memory of their brief reunion. For her, it was a small reminder of doing the right thing. For him, It was a revelation about humanity, gratitude, and the profound impact a single act of kindness could have. Their story was only beginning, shaped by one extraordinary night and the simple courage of a young woman who had stepped forward without hesitation, unaware of the life she was saving, and the life she was about to touch in ways far beyond imagination. Weeks turned into months, and life continued its usual rhythm for the waitress. The restaurant was busy most evenings, and she moved through it with quiet efficiency, serving customers, cleaning tables, and taking orders. Her days were long and sometimes exhausting, but she found comfort in the routine. She had a small apartment, a sibling who relied on her, and bills to manage. Life was simple, often challenging, yet she faced it with resilience and patience. Despite the simplicity of her life, she could not help but think occasionally about the man who had returned to the restaurant weeks earlier. His words, gentle and sincere, had stayed with her. She remembered how he had thanked her for saving his life without showing off or demanding recognition. That memory lingered, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder that kindness sometimes connected people in unexpected ways. She wondered briefly about him, but her daily responsibilities always pulled her attention back to the present. Meanwhile, the billionaire had fully recovered physically, but he was profoundly changed emotionally. His time in the hospital had forced him to confront his own priorities and the way he had been living. For the first time in many years, he found himself valuing things money could not buy. The selfless act of a young woman he barely knew had reminded him that true strength and courage often came in quiet, unassuming ways. It had inspired him to slow down and consider what truly mattered in life. He had returned to the restaurant several times since that first meeting, always quietly, without drawing attention to himself. Each time, he observed the waitress, learning small details about her routine, her mannerisms, and her interactions with others. He was careful not to make her uncomfortable, knowing that he was intruding into her simple life, a world so different from his own. He admired her ability to remain humble, kind, and patient despite the difficulties she faced. The waitress began to notice him visiting occasionally, though she did not understand why he kept coming. At first, she felt uneasy, unsure whether he was a regular customer or someone connected to her act of donation. There was nothing in his demeanor that suggested wealth or power. He simply seemed calm and thoughtful, sitting quietly at a table, often observing the restaurant and interacting politely with staff. Over time, she grew accustomed to his presence, though she kept a respectful distance. She remained cautious, as she had always approached people carefully, especially those whose lives seemed so different from her own. Their conversations became more frequent and more natural. They spoke about small things at first, the weather, the daily life of the restaurant, and little moments of the city that often went unnoticed. But gradually, they shared more personal stories. The billionaire spoke of his work, the pressures of success, and the loneliness that often accompanied his life. The waitress shared her experiences, her responsibilities at home, and the challenges of managing a modest life while taking care of her sibling. Through these conversations, a mutual respect and understanding grew. They saw each other not as a celebrity and a common worker, but as two human beings navigating complexities of life in their own ways. One afternoon, the billionaire asked her about her dreams and aspirations, curious to know what she hoped for beyond her daily responsibilities. She hesitated, not used to sharing her ambitions with anyone, and then quietly spoke about wanting a stable home, a sense of security for herself and her sibling, and the hope that one day life might offer a little more freedom and opportunity. She did not speak of wealth or luxury. Her dreams were practical, heartfelt, and deeply human. He listened attentively, absorbing every word, realizing how different her world was from his own, yet how much depth and courage it contained. In response, he shared stories from his past, times when it felt lost despite success, moments when he realized that achievement alone could not provide meaning or happiness. He spoke candidly, without pretense or ego, and she began to understand that behind his status, he was just another person grappling with life's challenges and seeking connection. The more she listened, the more she recognized a genuine sincerity in him, a side rarely seen by the world. As their friendship grew, so did a subtle bond built on trust, honesty, and shared humanity. He began to see her not only as the woman who had saved his life, but as someone whose perspective, strength, and kindness he genuinely valued. She noticed his quiet attentiveness, his thoughtful questions, and the way he treated others with respect, not as employees or acquaintances, but as individuals worthy of attention. Slowly, walls began to fall, and an unusual closeness emerged, one that neither of them had anticipated, but both felt deeply. Life continued around them. The restaurant remained a busy, noisy place, filled with laughter, arguments, and everyday chaos. Customers came and went, and the waitress moved among them effortlessly, her focus always on the present, yet now with a subtle awareness that her world had quietly expanded. The billionaire, meanwhile, balanced his business responsibilities with visits to the restaurant, always careful to maintain discretion and respect for her life. Their interactions were simple, grounded in everyday experiences, yet charged with a quiet significance that neither could ignore. Over time, the waitress began to appreciate his presence not as an intrusion, but as a comforting and intriguing part of her days. She saw the patience in his gestures, the care in his words, and the genuine interest he showed in her world. He did not try to impress her with wealth or status. Instead, he engaged with her as an equal, valuing her perspective, her experiences, and her thoughts. This humility and sincerity gradually softened any initial discomfort she had felt, allowing a real connection to take root. For him, the connection went deeper than admiration or gratitude. He recognized in her a rare quality of resilience and authenticity that had been absent from his life for many years. Her actions, demeanor, and choices revealed a strength born not from power or influence, but from necessity, integrity, and compassion. He found himself reflecting on her character often, inspired to become a better person, not through wealth or status, but through understanding and valuing the quiet courage found in ordinary people. Their growing friendship became a source of joy and reflection for both. She found herself smiling more, feeling seen and understood in ways she had not expected. He found moments of peace and clarity, a reminder of what life could feel like when shared with someone genuine and unassuming. The bond they were forming was subtle yet profound, built on trust, respect, and the recognition that small acts of kindness could create extraordinary connections. Even as their worlds remained separate in many ways, their paths had begun to align. The billionaire's visits became a regular, comforting presence in the restaurant, and she gradually allowed herself to notice and appreciate the care and attention he offered. Conversations that began casually grew richer and more meaningful, filled with laughter, shared observations, and thoughtful exchanges. The ordinary space of the restaurant became a place of extraordinary connection, where two lives from very different worlds met on common ground. One evening, as the restaurant quieted down near closing, they found themselves sharing a moment of stillness amid the usual bustle. He thanked her again, not just for the blood donation, but for allowing him into her world, for her honesty, and for the simple yet profound way she had impacted his life. She listened, feeling a warmth she had not expected, realizing that the connection they shared had grown far beyond the single act that had brought them together. As she finished her shift and packed away utensils, she carried with her a quiet sense of anticipation and reflection. The restaurant remained her daily world, practical and familiar, yet now enriched by the presence of someone who had shown her a perspective she had never considered. He, in turn, left with a sense of gratitude and hope, recognizing that their bond, formed through shared humanity and respect, had the potential to shape both of their futures in ways neither could fully predict. In the days that followed, their interactions continued to deepen, grounded in simple gestures, honest conversation, and mutual respect. The billionaire's presence no longer felt extraordinary or intimidating to her. It became part of the rhythm of her life, a subtle reminder that genuine human connection could arise in the most unexpected circumstances. For him, every visit reinforced a lesson that kindness, humility, and courage could be found in places often overlooked, and that the simplest actions could leave the deepest impact on a life. Their story, unfolding quietly amidst the ordinary, was becoming something remarkable, a testament to the power of empathy, understanding, and shared humanity. Months had passed since the night the waitress had donated her blood. Life at the small roadside restaurant had continued with its usual rhythm. Customers came and went, orders were taken, dishes were cleaned, and the waitress moved through it all with quiet grace. She had grown accustomed to her routine, finding comfort in the familiar pace of her days. Her responsibilities at home remained, and she balanced them with the same resilience and patience she had always shown. Life was simple, yet full of meaning in its small, ordinary moments. Meanwhile, the billionaire had continued his visits to the restaurant, though he remained careful to respect her space and comfort. Each visit was an opportunity to learn more about her world, to understand her thoughts, her struggles, and her quiet determination. He never tried to overwhelm her with his wealth or status. Instead, he engaged with her honestly, genuinely interested in her perspective and experiences. Over time, this consistency built trust, and their connection grew deeper. One evening, as the restaurant was closing and the last few customers had left, he arrived again. This time, the atmosphere felt different. The staff noticed a change in his demeanor. There was a seriousness in his steps, a quiet determination that was new. He did not settle at a table as usual, but waited near the counter until she came to clear it. The waitress paused for a moment, sensing that something significant was about to happen. She had grown used to his visits, but tonight felt unlike any other. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked softly, without the usual casual tone. His eyes met hers with a mixture of respect and sincerity that made her instinctively attentive. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron, and followed him to a quieter corner of the restaurant. The faint hum of the cooling air and distant city sounds seemed to fade as they focused on each other. He began speaking with care. "I have thought about that night, the night you saved my life, more than I can say," he said. "I have also thought about the months since. Your actions that evening changed not just my life physically, but also the way I see the world and myself. I realized in the rush of business and success, I had lost touch with the things that truly matter." She listened quietly, her heart beating slightly faster, unsure where this was leading but sensing the depth of his words. He continued, speaking slowly, deliberately. "In these months, I have come to admire you, not just for what you did, but for who you are. Your kindness, humility, and strength have shown me what real courage looks like. I have learned from you in ways I never expected." The waitress felt a warmth rise within her chest. She had always acted without expectation, giving her help because it was right, not because she wanted recognition. Yet here was someone whose life had been changed by her simple act, expressing gratitude in a way that felt deeply personal. She realized that he had not returned to impress her with his wealth, but to speak honestly about his thoughts and feelings. He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I know this may seem sudden," he said, "but I cannot ignore what I feel. Over these months, I have come to care about you deeply. More than admiration, more than gratitude. I want to ask you something important." The waitress looked at him, her mind racing, yet her expression remained calm. She had never expected the man to feel this way. Her simple life had collided with his world, and now she realized how profound the connection between them had become. She waited silently, letting him continue. "I am asking if you would consider building a future with me," he said gently. "Not because of my wealth, not because of my influence, but because I value you, your strength, and the way you see the world. I want us to share our lives, to grow together, and to explore what life can be when two people genuinely care for each other." For a moment, the restaurant seemed to pause. The soft buzz of appliances, the faint hum of the city outside, even the distant sound of footsteps faded. All that remained was the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet courage in his words, and the unexpected possibility that her life could change in ways she had never imagined. She felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, disbelief, and a strange warmth. She had always lived cautiously, protecting herself and her sibling from disappointment, never imagining that someone from such a different world could see her, understand her, and care for her genuinely. And yet, here he was, speaking from the heart, offering a connection built on honesty and respect, not expectation or obligation. She began softly, unsure how to put her feelings into words. She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I never expected this. I never imagined someone would see me like that. I just did what I felt was right that night. I never thought it would lead to this." He nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know," he said gently, "and I don't expect an answer right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel and to give you the choice. The rest is yours." No pressure, no demands, just honesty. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment and the significance of his words. She thought about the months since that night, the small conversations, the growing understanding, and the quiet moments of trust. She realized that despite their different worlds, she had come to care about him too, not because of wealth or status, but because of the genuine person he had shown himself to be. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady yet soft. "I need time," she said. "This is a lot to take in. But I want to understand this. Understand us. I care about you, and I want to see where this can go." He smiled, a mixture of relief and happiness washing over his face. "That's all I ask," he said. "Time, patience, and honesty. We will take it one step at a time." They spent a few more quiet minutes together, speaking gently, sharing small observations about life in the restaurant. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people beginning to navigate a new and unexpected chapter. The connection between them had grown slowly, naturally, and was now entering a stage where it could become something deeper, rooted in respect, care, and shared humanity. As she finished her shift that night, she walked home with a sense of reflection and cautious hope. Her life had always been about resilience, patience, and caring for her sibling, yet now there was a new possibility, one that could bring joy, companionship, and shared dreams into her life. She realized that a single act of kindness had started a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted, yet both had come to value deeply. The billionaire, too, left the restaurant that night with a feeling of profound gratitude, not just for her presence in his life, but for the lessons she had taught him without realizing it. He understood that wealth and power could never replace genuine connection, and he felt privileged to have someone in his life who embodied courage, kindness, and humility in ways he had long forgotten existed. Their worlds, once so separate, were now beginning to intertwine in ways that neither could have foreseen. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, the foundation had been laid, built on respect, admiration, and a shared understanding of what truly mattered in life. The story of that single night, the blood donation, and the quiet courage a young woman had transformed not only one life, but the trajectory of two, leaving open the promise of a future shaped by kindness, honesty, and human connection. In the days and weeks that followed, they continued to see each other, each meeting strengthening the bond that had started with an act of selfless courage. Conversations flowed naturally, trust deepened, and moments of laughter, reflection, and shared experiences filled the spaces between them. Both realized that life had a way of connecting people in the most unexpected moments, and that sometimes a simple act of kindness could lead to a journey neither had anticipated, but both were eager to explore. The waitress, once focused solely on survival and routine, began to see life differently. She noticed the small joys, the beauty in everyday moments, and the possibility of a future enriched by companionship and understanding. The billionaire, once consumed by success and ambition, learned again the value of humility, gratitude, and profound impact of genuine human connection. Together, they discovered that lives, no matter how different, could converge to acts of kindness and shared honesty, leading to a story of hope, growth, and unexpected love.